Hello, and welcome to the Poetry Pea. I'm Patricia, and this is a podcast dedicated to exploring Japanese short-form poetry in the English language. I wouldn't get too far if it was in the Japanese language, to be honest. Each week, we take a closer look at forms like haiku, senryu, and others, of course. Not just to understand their structure, but to deepen our appreciation of their craft, subtlety, and emotional range. Today, we're continuing our little adventure into the world of Senryu. Now, if you joined me last week, you'll remember we explored the different types of Senryu. And maybe, just maybe, discovered that these poems aren't always the funny, giggle-worthy little snippets people assume. Some are sharp, some are serious, and some are downright vicious. I also asked the question, should we separate haiku from senryu? And if so, how do we define the senryu? Spoiler alert, if you haven't listened to part 1 yet, you might want to hit pause, pop back and catch up, because, I didn't exactly get to a conclusion. In fact, I made no progress whatsoever. But we did hear some great poetry. Anyway, that's the fun of poetry, and of course, the fun of learning about it together. So, let's give that another go. Come with me, and let's see how far we get today. 25 years ago, Shirane made the point that at the time, maybe close to half of English language haiku, including many of the best ones, are in fact a form of senryu. I've not seen a more recent estimate, but from reading the various haiku and senryu journals, I suspect those numbers have not decreased. Certainly, as I look through our early issues, there were many senryu hiding under the skirts of haiku. I wondered why. Why is it that so many senryu are being published as if they were haiku? Or maybe saying it another way, why is it that so many journals don't distinguish between the two types of poetry? As in most cases, they're quite distinct. And as a reader, if you're having trouble, there are ways to distinguish between them. So I thought we should look at what constitutes a haiku and compare that with a senryu. And I found a very useful comparison by Klaus-Dieter Wirth in an article from the German Haiku Association. I'll put a link in the show notes for those of you who'd like to have a read, but it is in German. He says that a writer of haiku is an observer, that the writer speaks from their own experience, shares their experience with us, makes a discovery and passes it on to us, uses their intuition, is respectful in approach, and focuses on the present. Whereas the writer of senryu is a commentator, is an outside critic, gives us their interpretations, shares that knowledge with us, shows and instructs, questions things, exposes things, can be irreverent in approach, maybe even vulgar, as we saw last week, analyzes things from a distance, and tends towards aphorisms. Interestingly, what he doesn't say, and to be honest, that could be a mistake in my translation, is that the senryu, as we discovered last week, have one thing in common, and that is humanity. Although he does concede that for all too long, we in the English language Japanese short form field have generalized that a haiku is all about nature and a senryu about humans, making the point, which we're all familiar with, that man and nature are heavily intertwined. So, shall we examine some haiku and senryu and see if we come to the same conclusion as Mr. Wirth? Haiku. March winds, the chaotic sound of wind chimes. March winds, the chaotic sound of wind chimes. That was Linda Ludwig from the Poetry Pea Journal 224. And those of you who follow the Haiku Foundation's Revirals feature will no doubt have seen this recently, as the poem was chosen by Kay Schwartz for commentary. Do go and have a look at their archive. It's number 524, I believe. Now, this is a classic haiku, at least in my opinion. There's a seasonal reference and a cut at the end of line 1. Forgive me, Linda. My current bugbear is punctuation. I might have put a bit of punctuation at the end of that first line. A tilde, maybe. But, in fairness, that's a personal preference. And maybe I'll be able to persuade more of you to punctuate with some podcasts on that topic. Anyway, like I said, a classic haiku. That seasonal reference, March winds, works so well with the second and third line. The chaotic sound of wind chimes. I don't know about you, but when I read March winds, I felt a really cold wind blowing through me deep in my bones. Almost a feeling of doom, which is added to by the chaotic sound of the wind chimes. That wind is really getting up, and as many of us know, wind can be very destructive. Now, you see, that's my reading, but I bet if you put a few of us in a room, we'd come up with more. Isn't that the essence of haiku? That Linda has left us as the interpreter of her poem. If we return to Wirth's idea of haiku, I think we can definitely say that Linda, as the author of this poem, is an observer. She can be said to be speaking from her own experience and sharing it with us. There are definitely concrete images. I really feel that this poem focuses in on a moment in the present. And let's compare that with a poem from the journal Prune Juice. Chill wind, remembering the days before we knew. Chill wind, remembering the days before we knew. By Vera Constantineau, Prune Juice issue 45. These two poems begin in a similar way. It's that chilly old wind again. But in Constantineau's poem, Vera is making a comment. There is a feeling that things are not going well, but it's much clearer, isn't it? She tells us that the wind is chill, whereas Linda's poem shows us. Yet, some may argue that this poem could be a haiku. Well, if, like me, you require a seasonal reference in your haiku, that would help matters, because I don't think there is one here. But if we know anything about haiku, we know this. Haiku use concrete images, like the wind chimes, rather than the more ethereal idea of remembering the day before we knew. So how does this poem compare to the idea of Senryu that Wirth proposed? Constantineau is definitely a commentator. Perhaps a case could be made that she's an outside critic. She is, I feel, analysing things. Why, what? We're not sure. It's possible that we come to the conclusion that this is a Senryu more for what it is not than what it is. It's not a poem which includes concrete images. Yes, the poet is sharing something with us, but is it an experience? Do you know, the more I think about it, I wonder if it's Senryu or a micropoem. Now that's a conversation for another time. Let's have a look at a couple more poems. Haiku. Winter sun A bird's shadow lost in the trees. Winter sun. A bird's shadow lost in the trees. And that's Matt Snyder, Poetry Pea Journal 225. And this was nominated by Tony Williams as his nomination for the judge's choice in that journal. And he said of this poem in his commentary that this simple, subtle haiku has brevity, uses a fragment and phrase structure, shows an attractive shape, and includes the season word winter, which sets the stage nicely for the subject of our passing. For the topic this time was death. You could add, using Wirth's criteria, that Matt, as the poet, is an observer of a scene which is being shared with us. And similarly to Linda's poem, we're left to interpret the scene as we want. Now, if you're listening to this on your podcast app, I have done a YouTube version which has got the slides. You might want to go and have a look at that too. Senryu. Winter chill. The warmth of the poop bag. Winter chill. The warmth of the poop bag. Mark Teaford. Prune Juice, issue 44. I know last week I said Senryu do not have to be funny, but you have to admit, surely, you had a little smile on when I read this one out. Why is this one not classified as haiku? It does have a seasonal reference after all. Well, this is a very direct poem, isn't it? There's no room, at least in my mind, for the reader's interpretation. It is what it is. Mark Teaford is leaving us in no doubt. It's cold, but the poop bag the dog walker is carrying is lovely and warm. Punkt, as we might say over here. That's it. You know, that's one reason I don't have a dog. I'm really quite repulsed by the idea of picking up poo. If you could see my face, honestly. Haiku. Rotting plums. Packing her canning jars for recycling. Rotting plums. Packing her canning jars for recycling. Sam Blair, Poetry Pea Journal, 225. To quote Samantha Pardo Irigoyen, this haiku expertly touches on the theme of death, while also exploring life and rebirth, each unfolding as they progress. An excellent reminder that even though death ends one journey, it starts another. And that was part of Samantha's nomination commentary. Again, for the death topic. While Sam, as the poet, shows us this scene, gives us enough information to get our imaginations going, he leaves us as the interpreter. On one level, it's simple enough. Plums are rotting, cans will not be used, but the interesting word, as Samantha points out in her commentary, is recycling. This poem speaks of a cycle of life, utilizing two very concrete images to illustrate it. In the next poem, however, we hear a Senryu. The happy worm, the first taster of my apples. The happy worm, the first taster of my apples. Slobodan Pupovac, from Failed Haiku, issue 110. Now, I feel that this is definitely a poet showing us their interpretation. The happy worm, a touch of anthropomorphism. You know, that's the attribution of human form or behavior to, in this case, the worm, but, other animals or inanimate objects. Now, if you believe that the Senryu can be purely and simply differentiated on the basis of Senryu human haiku nature, then the anthropomorphism of the worm would put this poem into the Senryu category. Which brings us to another differentiation between the haiku and the Senryu. This time, I'd like to quote one of the masters of modern Senryu, Alan Pizzarelli, who has said that what distinguishes Senryu from haiku is the use of poetic devices, such as simile, personification, metaphor, anthropomorphism, and puns, in addition to humour. Okay, so he and I would disagree that you have to have humour in a Senryu, but the point stands. You're free to use poetic devices in a Senryu that you really shouldn't in a haiku, like anthropomorphism. Haiku. Vacation's end. In the child's pocket, a handful of sand. Vacation's end. In the child's pocket, a handful of sand. Maya Deneva, Poetry Pea Journal, Spring 2021. This haiku was another of the judges' choices, but this time in the Spring Poetry Pea Journal. Interestingly, two of the judges had this poem as their first choice. But they had two different interpretations. One spoke of the sand in the child's pocket signifying the sands of time as the child grows up, the hand clasped around it symbolizing the unwillingness to let go, instead clinging to the comforts of childhood, free of the anxieties and pressures of adolescence and adulthood. The second judge, however, said, "It's time to return to the humdrum routine of school and homework, and the endless days of summer have turned into rainy days and dark evenings. But all is not lost. Although our pockets may seem empty, we find their previous contents have been replaced. The sand of summer becomes stuck under our fingernails, and we feel the gritty texture between our fingertips, each grain a memory that will carry us through the long winter until summer arrives again." The poet, Deneva, is observing, but they're observing something very human, a vacation's end. Now that could leave us confused. Well, have we not been conditioned to think of Senryu as human? Haiku is nature. But it is more complex than that. Anita Virgil, another master of the modern Senryu, said, "Simplistically speaking, if it's a man within the world, it is haiku. If it is the world within the man, it is Senryu." I'll repeat that. If it's man within the world, it is haiku. If it's the world within the man, it is Senryu. And I think if we agree with Miss Virgil, this is clearly a haiku. Let's hear a Senryu on a similar subject. Holiday weekend. 3 floors of modern art I can't remember. Holiday weekend. 3 floors of modern art I can't remember. And that's by Michael McClintock from Simply Haiku. In this poem, again a reference that could be seasonal. Often, unless specified, the use of holiday will indicate summer. But when a short poem applies a seasonal reference, it's useful to think about what, if anything, the reference brings to the poem, and to think about the emphasis of the poem as a whole. I'm pretty sure that the point of using holiday weekend in this poem is not to create emotional resonance. Probably not. which is often the point of the kigo, but rather to establish the idea of an amount of time. In the poem, McClintock is very definitely making a pithy remark, giving us an opinion about modern art and the time that he may have wasted looking at it. It's a poem in which the world is definitely within the man. I think whether we use Wirth or Virgil's definition, this poem by McClintock is a Senryu. Virgil did a very interesting interview with Robert D. Wilson, which you'll find in Simply Haiku. And in this interview, she uses a pair of poems to show how she separates the haiku from the Senryu when they are employing very similar seasonal references. Let's hear the poems that she chose. For her haiku, she chose Winter Moonlight, the shadow of the stone pagoda, the shadow of the pine tree. Winter moonlight, the shadow of the stone pagoda, the shadow of the pine tree. By Shiki. She doesn't say which translation. And for her Senryu, she used this. The winter moon, every shadow is handless. The winter moon, every shadow is handless. An anonymous Senryu, again, don't know the translator. I'm wondering if it's Blythe, though. If anyone can tell me, that would be great. Now, I found Shiki's poem very interesting because he's given us a poem in three parts, really, hasn't he? Something that's often frowned upon in modern haiku. But there's nothing wrong with it. So I implore editors, other editors, to give them space in their journals. Anyway, that aside, can you feel the coldness and the loneliness emanating from his poem? He hasn't told us that the scene is cold and lonely. He's shown that to us as an observer of the scene and left us, the reader, to feel the cold ourselves. In the second poem, the Senryu, we're told directly that it's cold. Why are the shadows handless? They've got their hands in their pockets trying to warm them up. As Virgil points out, all of us behave like this in the cold. If we have pockets, that is. I know I often have to employ gloves and pockets. And if I'm out on my bike, if I'm honest, multiple pairs of gloves. Anyway, as Virgil says, the haiku conveys its message indirectly. The Senryu goes for the jugular. There's really usually little or no subtlety about the Senryu. But there can be. These few poems, I believe, have illustrated just how we can distinguish haiku from Senryu. I'll put links in the essay I write on the topic. Do keep an eye on your mailing to find out when it's available. But then there's the question, why should we distinguish the haiku from the Senryu? Many poets would ask, why bother? Lee Gerger, in his book Haiku, A Poet's Guide, which was written back in 2003, says that the distinctions in English language circles are blurred, maintaining that the haiku and Senryu exist along a continuum. And you know, this is an opinion I might have agreed with before I started to explore Senryu in more depth. I hope what I've shown you in this and the last podcast is that the two forms are quite distinct. They employ different methodologies and devices. They are written from disparate perspectives. If the English language short forms are to be taken seriously, and particularly if Senryu is to be taken seriously, if it's to lose its reputation as the black sheep of the haiku family, haiku's easier to write, non-poetic cousin, then Haiku and Senryu should be seen as distinct forms in their own right and valued as distinct forms in their own right. I know some folks might disagree with me, and to those folks I dedicate this next poem from Michael McClintock. Two sides to our haiku squabble, mine and shitheads. Two sides to our haiku squabble, mine and shitheads. Well, lovelies, that's all I've got time for today. But fear not, I've got one last hurrah in this Senryu series coming up next week. Think of it as an encore before the curtain comes down. Temporarily, of course. I'm sure we'll try Senryu again. Now, if you happen to disagree with anything I've said, yes, even though I did rather cleverly lean on McClintock's Senryu for support, do let me know. I'm not afraid to be challenged. Keeps the ink fresh, doesn't it? This week's mission, should you choose to accept it, head over to the Poetry Pea YouTube channel where there's a video prompt waiting just for you. It's very visual, very inspiring, and very much not for my inbox. Thank you very kindly. If your poem turns up there, it gets ignored, like that piece of mouldy bread your aunt, who needs new glasses, uses to make you a bacon butty. Such a waste. No, pop that poem, or two, or three, or however many you want to write, in the YouTube comments instead. That's where all the magic happens. If you fancy supporting the podcast, and bless your poetic little heart if you do, you can become a member and join our lovely little community. You can buy me a coffee. Actually, I run on a variation of coffee and metaphors. Oh, and lovely plump dates. Yum. Or you can sing our praises on social media like a caffeinated choir of heavenly angels. Go on, make a noise, preferably the good kind. Right, so until next time, when we'll get up to a little bit of mischief with Senryu, keep writing. And don't forget, if you're not on our mailing list, head over to the website and sign up. You don't want to miss anything. Ciao!